guys, welcome to another edition of Rwanda Now and Then, where I go back through a diary I kept for 2 years when I first moved to Rwanda as a VSO volunteer in 2007. In the last episode, I had just had all of my vaccinations and been declared medically fit to come to Africa. So let's dive in. Okay, so in the last one, we were in July 2007 and there were a lot of posts. We got through a lot of stuff, covered a lot of ground. Now we're in August 2007 and not as many posts, less than half, so should be a slightly shorter video. I start off on the 4th of August gushing about having just watched this film. I was about to say video, but we've moved on to DVDs by that point. And it's a film called In America. I think it starred Paddy Considine and I'm going to have a quick look. Who was in it? Paddy Considine and Samantha Morton. And the thing that was kind of interesting about that is I'm gushing about it, but I have to say today I can't remember anything about it. I feel like it followed the story of an immigrant family in America. Yeah, but I just find this interesting because, you know, this is in the days before streaming. When we talk about 2007, we're going back a way. You know, I don't think we had Netflix at that point. I was getting my DVDs, my films through a company called, I think it was either Love Films or Tesco DVD rental, and you were allowed to have 3 DVDs at any one time, and when you'd finished watching it, you'd post it back and they'd post you the next one. So you had like a list of what you wanted to watch and they'd just send it to you on a rotating basis. So, yeah, wow. Yeah. All right. So then the next one, Sunday the 5th of August, I've titled it Kinyarwanda. Miriweho amakuru yawe. Okay, I was really getting into the idea of going to Rwanda now, and I was like looking up everything that I could find. So VSO have something called the Vol Zone, so the Volunteer Zone, which is a database of information on each of the countries they work in. There's a section for pre-departure volunteers to learn about the volunteering strategies, political and cultural aspects, and languages of their destination. So I clearly got access to that. When I get to Rwanda, I should get some language training, although I'm arriving at a different time to most of the volunteers who will get here in September. I don't know if I've said it there, but the reason for that is I was just finishing my master's degree at the University of Cardiff in Wales, and because of that, my course didn't end in time for me to join the September intake for the volunteers going to Rwanda. So I was going to go through all the training, but I'd have to delay and arrive the following month in November. So not a long time, or at least at the time I didn't think it was a big deal. But, you know, a month is a long time for people to be in country. You learn a lot very quickly when you arrive somewhere. And so, yeah, I did miss out on the initial learning stage and had to do a bit of catching up when I got here, but we'll get into that later on. Hopefully I will still get some Kinyarwanda lessons, and there are some online modules I have to get to grips with first. The modules aren't too bad, just learning to speak and listen rather than the grammatical structure of the language, but it's quite different to English. I have real trouble retaining vocabulary. My pronunciation isn't generally too bad, if only I could remember the words in the first place. And this has always been one of the big challenges for me. I am not good with spoken languages. I mean, I was going there as a sign language interpreter, or interpreter as we'd say in the UK, interpreter in Rwanda, interpreter in the UK, and I pick up sign languages pretty quickly, but spoken languages, whole other kettle of fish, in one ear, straight out the other. So I just struggle to retain words. And part of the thing with Kinyarwanda, well, there's a few things with Kinyarwanda. I mean, first of all, you know, coming from the UK, if you're learning French or Spanish, or even German. There's a lot of commonalities with English because, the English were invaded by France for about, 300, 400 years. So there's a lot of crossover with France. There's, English itself I think it's passed down from a Germanic language root. So there's a few bits in there that we understand. And of course, the Romance languages across Europe are all traced back to Latin. And of course, the Romans invaded the UK. So we have a lot of Latin base in there as well. So, if you're learning other European languages, they share a commonality. Whereas when you come to Rwanda, Kinyarwanda, Kirundi are Bantu languages. And that is a whole other kettle of fish, which shares no commonality at all with the group of languages that we have, the Indo-European languages. And so it's difficult because there are sounds like there are sounds that I will never make naturally, and makes it harder to pronounce things well. But also there are a lot of words that sound very, very similar. I recently went to Kaninya Canopy Walk, and there's another place called Kaninya. It sounds pretty much the same. You can make the mistake of, if you're going to a restaurant and you ask for imboga, you're asking for vegetables, but if you ask for imbogu, you're asking for a water buffalo. So there's a lot of things to get your head around there, and it's a whole different sound system, a lot of different sounds. Usually when you're learning words, you try to link them to words that you already know. I'm trying to think of a way of doing that, like nobody uses it in France anymore, but when I was learning French in school, the old way to ask for the Tourist Information Office was où est le syndicat d'initiative? And of course, to me, d'initiative sounds like initiative. So I would think, I'm going to take the initiative to go and look at the city today. So où est le syndicat d'initiative, which is still the only phrase in French that I still remember from school. But you could hear words, and even if they didn't mean exactly the same thing, you could link them to other sounds that you had that kind of gave you a clue as to what something would mean, if that makes any sense. Whereas, of course, in Kinyarwanda, the sounds don't sound anything like things that you can easily identify in English. So it becomes a lot harder to make those connections and to retain the vocabulary. So I added to the fact that, some people are really good at remembering vocabulary and others aren't. And I just never have been, which has always been a bit of a barrier to learning Kinyarwanda for me. And also, you need to use a language every day to really retain it and stick. And in Rwanda, I function very well in English most days. Tiny bit of Kinyarwanda, but mostly English is fine for me on a day-to-day. And if I try to speak Kinyarwanda, people will laugh because I mispronounce it. So then you don't feel like trying. But then immediately they'll switch to English. So again, there's no incentive to keep trying. I remember trying to learn a little Yoruba once. That was easier as I managed to get books and tapes from a university department, and there were online resources. Kinyarwanda seems to be very short on resources, and I have found no online sites yet. Yeah, that was a big thing. I was really fascinated by West Africa growing up, and there was a period where I really wanted to go to West Africa. I had a friend in Benin, and I wanted to go and visit him, and I was trying to learn a little bit of Yoruba. And there was a university that had a whole Learn Yoruba set at the time, but you couldn't find anything about Kinyarwanda back then, which is interesting because today Google Translate has it. ChatGPT is even better at translating to and from Kinyarwanda. So there are a lot more resources now, but I still wouldn't say that there's a lot. I mean, there's another language in the area is Swahili. If I was doing this again, I probably have learnt Swahili just because that does share a lot of familiar kind of sounds with English. It's also usually a lot shorter, the words, and a bit easier for English speakers to learn, and you can speak it around the region. So, you can speak it in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, a bit in Rwanda. You don't hear it so much in Rwanda, but my friends who speak Swahili say, yeah, you can get about in Swahili. So if I was doing it again, I would probably have gone for Swahili. But I went for Kinyarwanda. Yeah, and it was really difficult back then to find any resources about it at all. However, I have joined an online language exchange and found a Kinyarwanda teacher in Kigali who wants to improve his English, although he's already very good. Hopefully we can practice on Skype before I get out there, and then I'll already know at least one person in the city. So yeah, that was really my strategies. I went online onto language platforms and I found a guy who was speaking Kinyarwanda and offering Kinyarwanda. And I also thought that was a good idea because as I was moving there, it meant that at least I would know one Rwandan person in Rwanda before I got there. And I thought that would be quite useful. And it's kind of interesting to see, we would have been talking on Skype because back then there was no Zoom. And now there is Zoom. And now there is no Skype because Skype has been discontinued. So times they are a-changing. I've also been chatting to one of the volunteers over there who's coming back in September. Hopefully we'll have a chance to meet up. She's been there for a year as a YFD, Youth in Development. So voluntary services overseas, they had the adult volunteer program, the main volunteer program, and they also had the Youth for Development program, which was a shorter program. So adults usually went for 2 years. I think youth went for 1 year, so a gap year. Oh yes, so she was a gap year student. And then it says apparently another YFD also went for the job that I've got. So I feel a bit sad as that now means they are coming home. I don't know why they told me that actually. That is kind of a bit sad, Yeah, so I had got my placement with the Rwanda National Union of the Deaf. But, when I got that position, I didn't know anybody else had gone for it. So, yeah, I was a bit sad. We've also been having an interesting discussion about the Antimalarials. Oh, okay, right, yes. I went to do some dreading in Bath. So Bath is a city in the UK and I used to do dreadlocks. I've spoken about this in former videos. Go and learn all about my dreadlocking career. It was fun times. And her housemate had also been a VSO to South Africa. I've talked to about 4 or 5 people now about their experience on the medication and it hasn't been inspiring. So my preference is for mefloquine, Lariam, because you only have to take it once a week instead of every day. The problem is that it can cause serious psychological problems, and everyone I've spoken to who took it changed to doxycycline. Doxycycline is an antimalarial you have to take every day. I've done a whole video about this. Mefloquine is the antimalarial of the devil. It was banned by most sensible countries, including the British Army, because it causes psychotic episodes and lists suicide as a side effect, which I've never understood. I mean, surely if you have got a drug and the list of side effects includes unaliving yourself, you take that drug off the market. Even if that's a very small number of people it creates that reaction in, surely that's not a good thing. Go and have a look at the video I did about anti-malarial drugs and living in a malarial zone, because I mean it was an interesting thing. We don't have malaria in the UK, like we don't have rabies, so there are a lot of health considerations that I was learning about at this time that I hadn't really considered. So yeah, mefloquine causes severe depression in some people, claustrophobia and seizures. It mucks up your neurochemistry. I can't say that word. It mucks up your neurochemistry quite badly and has been linked to unaliving. The only one who I spoke to who didn't report horrific side effects said she experienced really crazy dreams. So there were only 2 options at that time, mefloquine and doxycycline. Mefloquine, you took it once a week. Doxycycline, you took it every day, because at that point there's the other one, Malaron, which when it came out really didn't have many side effects at all. That wasn't on offer at the time. So yeah, the problem is that the other option, doxycycline, is an antibiotic and can lead to sun sensitivity, i.e. you burn a lot easier. And someone said it gives them occasional stomach upsets. So you don't really want to be more sensitive to the sun when you're going to live on the equator. Plus, taking antibiotics for a prolonged period of time is not recommended. Apparently, both medications are only really recommended for up to 6 months. So 2 years could have pretty bad effects. This is something I need to talk to my doctor about. Several of the volunteers out there that I've spoken to said that they don't take anything. They say they started off by taking the medication, but due to the side effects, they stopped. Now they take extra precaution not to get bitten. So yeah, I recently mentioned I was reacting to somebody who came to the area as a tourist on holiday, and he was being a little bit blasé, sort of going, oh, well, everybody I've spoken to says that they don't take their antimalarials, so, you know, you'll be fine, which isn't true. You know, if you don't take your antimalarials, there's a very, very real chance of getting malaria, and it isn't fun. And it can get dangerous quite quickly. But of course, you know, everybody he spoke to said they didn't take anything. I mean, firstly, because, you know, nobody can afford to take antimalarials every single day of their entire life. But also because if you did that, your body would it would break down. It's not something that you can do long term, which sort of is what I was saying in that video, is just because you talk to people and they're not taking antimalarials doesn't mean you shouldn't. If you've got them and you're visiting for a short time, even if it's for a few months, you know, up to 6 months, take your antimalarials, really do. Anyway, yeah. That's my lecture over with. Yeah, so I was saying here, I need to talk it over with my doctor, but also that one volunteer said that taking mefloquine made her life absolutely miserable until she stopped taking it. And also that it stays in the blood long term, which is a problem because the attractive part about mefloquine is that you only need to take it once a week instead of every day with doxy. But of course, it's that strong that once you take it, the effects keep rolling. So if you have a really bad reaction to it, you're going to be freaking out for a week before it wears off. You know, that's not a good thing. That's really not a good thing. And they said that one volunteer who had taken it and stopped taking it was still experiencing side effects even after she'd finished taking it. And this is one of the things, you know, you're moving to a totally different world, a different culture, a different climate, different geography, with people that you've never met before. You know, you're not moving with your family, you're on your own. You know, there's going to be so much to cope with that you do not want to add talking to furniture to that list. You know what I mean? You want to be in full control of your mental faculties in order to deal with all of the changes going on in your life. So mefloquine, I can't even say it. Meth. Don't take meth. don't take meth when you're going abroad. No, don't take mefloquine, was basically the message that I came away with. Anyway, I shan't worry about that yet. I've just started feeling better after the cholera vaccine. It's the only one I've had a bad reaction to, and the only one I have to take orally. So yes, when you take your cholera vaccine, it's an oral one. You drink it, which is not a pleasant feeling because like drinking bad water is how you get cholera. So, you know, you're like, oh, it's not so nice. It comes in a sachet of Alka-Seltzer type powder, which you put into a glass of water. It fizzes up and you add a small vial of liquid, which is the vaccine. You stir it and you drink it down. It tastes foul, sickly sweet because of the powder. It also gave me a slight stomach upset for a couple of days and I felt quite down. That's interesting because in my memory, if you ask me which vaccine I had a bad reaction to, I'd have said I didn't really, except maybe after the rabies one, I felt a little bit sweaty. But yeah, I don't remember having a bad reaction to them, but clearly I did to the cholera one. There's actually been somebody asking in the expats forum recently where they can get the cholera vaccine. You don't need it to come to Rwanda at all, but you do need it if you're going to be working in refugee camps or if you're going to be working in areas with poor sanitation. And of course, I didn't know where I was going to be working yet, so I took everything basically. And yeah, there's also a real spike in it across East Africa at the moment. So people have actually been asking for the cholera vaccine again, whereas usually nobody takes that. Yeah, but then I just say, enough whinging, because cholera itself would be a lot worse. So we've gone through vaccines and the health check, and now we're working on language. Oh, Blake. Oh, it's called the Angsty Monkey Festival. I've titled it the Angsty Monkey Festival, but it was actually the Oktamukti Festival. So Oktamukti is a place up in Scotland where my friend was, and I went up there for it. So yes, Angsty Monkey Festival. And that dog there is a dog called Blake, who was the sweetest, goodest boy ever. He's a good boy. He's a good boy. Yeah. Oh, yes, I went up to Scotland to see my friend Andy, and I think my friend Jan was there as well. And he took me to St Andrews, which is a very, very posh part of Scotland. That's where Prince William and Kate met. Yeah, we went out walking. We went to the pub a lot. That was good. Oh, and here's some of the artwork. Yeah, so then I went to Glasgow with my friend Jan. She's absolutely lovely, and she's such an amazing artist, and she was painting animal skulls. So in Scotland you go out walking on the hills and in amongst the heather and the forests, and you often find animal skulls like deer and fox and sheep, and she used to paint them, and they're beautiful. Yeah, she's really, really talented lady. Okay, so after the festival, or after Scotland, I went down to my mum's and I went out walking with my friend Jim. So, we're both into standing stones, and there was this story of a stone called the Judith Stone. And I think it was just a glacial boundary stone, glacial erratic. So a glacial stone way back during the Ice Age, when all of Britain was basically covered in ice, as the ice started to melt, these glaciers came down the country and they forged these huge valleys, really deep valleys. And they also picked up giant lumps of rock. And as the ice melted, the rock just kind of got dumped on the ground. So every now and again, you'll just find this massive rock in the middle of nowhere for no particular reason other than it had been dumped there when the ice melted from the glaciers. And there's one called the Judith Stone, and we decided, we decided to go out and try and find it. Oh yeah, here's the bit. Yeah, this is the bit I remember. I remember this day really clearly because we went trudging out. It was really, really muddy, so we go trudging out across this field looking for this sodding stone. We eventually found it. And then we got chased by cows. People don't know this, but cows are bloody dangerous. They kill a lot of people in the UK each year. Like cows, when they get sort of a bee in their bonnet, they just they charge. And we're looking at this stone, and all of a sudden we see these cows lining up at the end of the field, and it's like an army lining up and kind of looking at us. And we're like, that's a bit weird, isn't it? And then they started moving quite quickly. And we just turned, and Jim grabbed this stick and we just legged it. And oh my goodness, what did it say here? I doubt I would ever have found it without Jim, the stone without Jim, whose friend knew where it was. It was quite an adventure. We found a natural spring or marsh, which I fell into and almost lost my shoe. I don't remember that bit. And then we got chased by Randy Bullocks. But it was worth it. Yeah, we ran. Oh my goodness, we ran. Yeah, young male cows. Oof, they were on a mission. Then we went to see Marge, who is Marilyn's mum, and we went to Farrington's. I told you all about Farrington's, I think, in the last video. It's this beautiful farm shop we used to go for breakfast. Okay. Single 1 year. So I had been in a relationship for 4.5 years. with this really lovely bloke. And, we'd had a really good run of it. We had met when I was in university. And we met through a pagan moot, actually. And his best mate at the time married my best mate at the time. And we were a couple. And we had an amazing time. We went off around Australia together. Lots of really good memories. But I think, we were in our mid-20s. And I think we just kind of realised that the world was very big and life is very long, and there's a lot of things to go out and be and experience and become. And so it was an incredibly amicable parting of ways, and with a lot of love, And so what I'm saying here is that we went out to celebrate the fact that we'd broken up a year ago. We'd stayed really good friends. He'd moved over the other side of town. I'd moved a couple of streets from where we used to live. So it had been a whole year since we'd parted company, and we went out to celebrate, and yeah, that was nice. It really confused his brother, I think, though, because, we'd stay good friends and we had a lot of mutual friends, so we occasionally saw each other around. And his brother came to visit him at one point, and I was, I'd gone over for some reason. I was hanging out, and I think his brother found it really odd that we were still on good terms, because, I think it's quite traditional when people break up that, you take sides and, you're one person's friend and we all dislike the other person. And there was none of that with us. We were just really good friends. So I think his brother was a bit uncertain what to say. So yeah, it was fine. Wasted morning. Okay. Blah, grumble, grumble, grumble. Bloody bureaucracy. Oh dear, what happened? I got up at 7 a.m. this morning, feeling pants after my last round of injections yesterday. My final rabies, second hepatitis B, and a fizzy dose of cholera, for which they'd lost my bloody appointment. Oh, right, I get it. So what had happened was I'd had a round of injections, so I was feeling really bad, and I went to the clinic to, I guess, get some more injections, and they'd lost the appointment, and they kept asking me if I had been given a card, and I said, no, I wasn't given a card. I wrote it in my diary, but they hadn't given me a card. So, all right, I don't know what I'm really so annoyed about there, but anyway. Okay, so then I had to go down to the local magistrates court because I had to get some documents notarized. So in order for VSO to apply for my work visa in Rwanda, they needed a copy of my degree certificate, my MA grades, and a CRB check, which was the Criminal Records Bureau check, so your criminal records check. And those had to be notarized by a magistrate, so I had to go and do that. I walked all the way across town to the court. I'd phoned earlier in the week and was told to turn up any time between 9:30 and 10 a.m, Monday to Friday, and someone would see me. So I got there, I went through the security barriers and was told to go to the desk and ask which court I needed. The desk was not a desk. It was a long row of desks behind glass, each one with its own buzzer. I buzzed one, and 2 minutes later a man appeared. "Hello," I said. "I've come to get some papers notarized." "Oh, you want the one on the end," he said. "Never mind, I needed the exercise," I laughed as he disappeared off through the door again. So, I walked to the end of the counters and pressed another buzzer. Out comes a lady. "Hello," I repeat. "I've come to get some papers notarized." "Oh, you want counter number 1? Up the stairs, turn right." "Thanks." I get up there, the place is empty. The court is locked. I sit, and after about 15 minutes, a few other people turn up and mill. A woman comes out. "Are you here for fines?" No. "Just to get some papers notarized, please." "Oh, have you made an appointment?" "No, I was told I could just turn up between 9:30 and 10, Monday to Friday." "Oh, okay. I'll check with the clerk." About another 20 minutes later, I get called in before the magistrate. all a bit intimidating just to get some bloody papers signed. "Hello," I say, "I've come to get some papers notarised." A long discussion ensues, in which I was asked what I actually wanted them to do. Is this a trick question? Notarise these copies just to say that they're of the original. They couldn't help. They didn't know what to do. They sent me away to find out more about what they were supposed to do. Then make another appointment or go and see a solicitor. Oh my goodness me. Wow. Yeah, I remember standing there. It was intimidating. I walked into a courtroom and they were on a slightly raised platform kind of looking down at me. I was like, you know. As I was leaving, one of the security guards recognised me and said, "All right." "Not really," I said, slightly irritated by this point that I had traipsed all the way across town for nothing to stand in an intimidating courtroom and receive information as useful as a square tyre. He nodded and started to turn. I quickly explained what had just happened and asked whether he knew where I could find a solicitor. The security guard immediately nodded and put out a hand to a tall, dark and relatively handsome young man who turned out to be just such a solicitor. "Have you got a moment to help this young lady?" he asked, and I was taken into a side room. "I can't stay long," said the solicitor. "I've got a case." However, once I explained what I needed, he laughed and said, "Oh right, so you're not a criminal then?" And suddenly he wasn't in so much of a rush. Bloody cheek. But he was very helpful and chatty. I, on the other hand, was tired, fed up and feeling yucky from the walk and all the jabs. So yeah, he gave me his card and told me just to make an appointment with his firm. And I went and checked with VSO and they said that all notarising usually involved was stamping the documents with the firm's seal and signing it. So nothing more complicated than that. Oh yeah, and I made a little jibe at the end here where I said it's amazing how the security guard in the court was 1,000 times more helpful and informative than the magistrates themselves. I mean, looking back on that now, it blows my mind that magistrates didn't understand what notarising documents were. I mean, surely that's magistrating 101, you know? I don't know. That seems a bit weird to me looking back now. And I've put at the bottom here, there's a song. If you ever watch Futurama, there's a song about bureaucracy that Hermes sings. I can't play it for copyright reasons, but I'll leave the link below because I was just saying the whole thing just reminded me of that song so much. Okay, so penultimate post called Crazy Hectic. Let's see what this is about. So I've just slumped back down in my chair after a very stressful week. Okay, so apparently I had my dissertation draft reviewed by my supervisor. So, you know, you're writing your dissertation for your master's degree and you go and show what you've been writing to your supervisor for a bit of input and guidance. And apparently she said there was a lot of bias in there. And I said, I can't deny that. She was right. So I spent the past week sifting through the sea of red pen markings and rewriting, evaluating and copy-pasting till my fingers bled. Unfortunately, by the time I started the corrections, I had completely lost all interest in it. What started off as a sexy subject had, 4 months later, become about as interesting as stale cheese. Yeah. I think I checked out by that point, you know. There was like, Rwanda was flashing lights ahead of me, sort of calling me to come away to adventure and new lands. And I was stuck there writing and rewriting my dissertation, which, I mean, I really believed in the subject. I was studying, you know, vulnerable witnesses and their experience of the legal system. And I thought it was a really important subject, but by this point I felt like I enjoyed the research part of it. I enjoyed researching it and finding out all of the things that I wanted to know. But then, of course, like most students, the writing up of it, it just sapped the joy out of it. You know, I just didn't feel much for it by that point. I gave it one final push, though, and I have to admit to being quietly satisfied with the end result. I think it's not a bad piece of work, possibly even good. Problem is, when you've been staring at something for so long, you lose all sense of judgment. So we shall have to wait and see what the grade says. The reason I'm not relaxing, however, is that this morning I sent it to the printers. I'm ordering 3 copies. 2 have to be handed in. Oh, and I also printed out 1 to give to the British Deaf Association because, you know, I used to work for them and they really helped me with the advocacy and the research. And so I was giving them a copy. Oh my goodness. 3 copies came to £98. £98 for printing out 3 copies of a dissertation. And this was in 2007. I dread to think what it would be today. Oh my goodness. And that's before I asked them to be bound. And each copy needs 2 bindings as I'm publishing the data in an accompanying book. Oh yeah, so I had the dissertation, which was about that thick. And then I had the research translation. So all of the interviews that I translated from sign language into English also had to be included. Oh my goodness. I have now promised myself that I will not look at a single word of it again until the marking comes back, by which time I should be in Rwanda. If I do look at it again, I'll notice all those little typos and annoying things I missed the first 7 proofreads. We all know what that's like. You don't truly proofread an email until you've sent it. It's the same with a dissertation. You can't really proofread it until you've actually submitted it. Sod's law. I accept now that it's out of my control, a done job. It really was a hard slog getting that last bit done. Took me longer than I'd anticipated simply because of my lack of enthusiasm. I think every student knows what that's like. Yeah, you just get to a point where it's like, whew, checked out. Oh, okay. So I actually say I call it lack of enthusiasm, but I have a curious suspicion that a little part of me didn't entirely want it to be over. There's a mighty big change coming, and in a way, that dissertation was my purpose for being here in Cardiff, at uni. Now I've got to accept that's about over. Perhaps that's why I was dragging my heels a little bit. But yes, it was downright boring by the end too. Anyway, the other reason I pooped is that I finally got those bloody documents notarised. It involved driving like a loon all around Roath trying to find a sodding parking spot. Then the receptionist took them in to show the solicitor, who authorised her to stamp the copies. I'm sorry, but this was just paperwork for the sake of it. Ridiculous. But I will stop grumbling. It's done now and in the post. And, you know, I didn't know at the time, but that was my introduction to Rwandan, the Rwandan love of stamping things. There's such a love of stamping things here. It's getting a bit better now, but honestly, I'll probably get into it later on. I mean, any letter, any official letter, any business letter, anything like that, you have to have a stamp made for your company. People talk about this a lot in Japan. Apparently in Japan it's even worse. Like every individual has to have their own personal stamp, and you have to stamp everything that you sign, which makes no sense because, you know, like a stamp can be forged just as easily as a signature can be forged. So probably more so. So yeah, but it's just this, I don't know what it is, but in Rwanda as well, if you've got any official documents, you have to stamp them. If it's a company thing, you have to stamp them. So what's left to do? Don't know. Bit stumped, to be honest. Spent so long avoiding doing my dissertation that now it's done, I've lost my focus. And I strongly remember that feeling because, you know, for the whole year, I'd just been working full-time on my master's. And, you know, it took up my world at that time. And, you know, once it's done and you hand it in, again, I think every student knows this feeling, is you feel a little bit lost. Like, you think, when you're doing it, you think, oh my God, it's going to be amazing. I'm just going to hand it in. It's going to be over. It's going to be fabulous. I don't have to think about it again. I'm going to feel so free. I'm going to have so much more time. And then you hand it in and it's almost like, yeah, what do I do now? You don't feel that sudden freedom. I mean, it is a relief, but you don't know what to do with all that time. You've just been thinking about the same thing for so long. Suddenly, you're not thinking about it anymore. What do you fill that space with? What takes over your thoughts? And I know I had Rwanda coming, but I think it was still in the early phases. It was still about doing my vaccinations and filling out paperwork. So it didn't really feel properly tangible yet. Not in the first few days after handing in your dissertation. It's just a weird limbo. You don't know what to do with yourself. And then the final post for that month, raised print, I just got back from the printers, 3 copies of my dissertation. And raised print, it's quality printing when the ink is so thick that it feels like it's raised off the page. All right, so that was it. University finished, a little bit of Kinyarwanda learnt, and ready to go.